breaking and entering, drunk and disorderly, law and order. A former prosecutor and a defence lawyer, not your typical pairing. And the result? Conversations about crime and punishment that are guaranteed to get you thinking.
Welcome to Justice Matters, a weekly podcast. Our episodes are available every Monday on Apple Podcast, Spotify and YouTube. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok. Enjoy the episode. This episode contains descriptions of murder, rape and violence. Listener discretion is advised. Hello Lizzie, how are you?
I'm good, Joe. How are you?
I am very well.
Excellent.
Here we are going to talk about one of Australia's most famous serial killers, if not the most famous serial killer.
Well, yes, and the reason that I thought we should discuss this case,
Yes.
the case being Ivan Milat,
Yes.
otherwise known as the backpacker murderer,
Yes.
is because I actually teach this case, not in depth, but because of one of the principles that came out of the case about legal representation.
Of course, yes.
It's an authority that I teach, and I just happened to mention when I taught it this semester, I said, because every semester my students get younger,
Yes.
and I feel older,
Yes.
and I said, now I'm assuming that people would remember who Ivan Milat is, and I was met with blank faces, like almost a whole generation, I think, of people who maybe don't know who Ivan Milat was.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he passed away
he's
recently.
dead.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so, I mean. Yeah.
And so it's not that I want to bring glory to his, offences or make him infamous, but I also think this is such a pivotal case in our history. And so I just thought maybe it would be worth discussing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
All right, fire away. Where do we start with Ivan Milat?
Gosh, well, I do a lot of notes. I have many notes on Milat. There is a lot that has been written about him.
Yes.
And in fact, I think there are numerous things you can watch that tell the story either of him or based on his offending.
Yes. It's even entered popular culture, hasn't it? The Ivan Milat story.
Yes, I think
the
so.
Movie Wolf Creek.
Wolf Creek.
I was going to say Deep Creek, but it's Wolf Creek.
I was not able to watch because it's too scary. Overview.
Yes.
Ivan Robert Marco Milat, his full name, was Australian, serial killer who was convicted of the backpacker murders between 1989 and 1993 of 7 young backpackers. There were 5 foreign nationals and 2 Australian victims.
Yeah.
Their bodies were discovered in the Belangolo State Forest, southwest of Sydney, between 92 and 93.
Yeah.
So I just want to say the names of our victims to start. We had Deborah Everest and James Gibson. They were Australian. Simone Schmeidel, who was German. Gabor Neugebauer and Anja Habschied, who were German. I am probably butchering their names, which I feel bad.
Oh, it sounded good to me.
And Caroline Clark and Joanne Walters, who were British. So they are the 7 that he was charged with.
Yes.
There is a suggestion there were more victims.
Yeah, because there were missing persons in the area that have never been
found.
Yes.
So these are the ones we can definitively
Yes.
connect to Milat.
Yes.
So how did it all start? The discovery. So there was a group of hikers who were in the Belangolo State Forest and they came across a decaying corpse on September 20, 1992. When authorities came to investigate, they discovered a second body about 100 feet away. It started this investigation, obviously, because it was so abnormal to be finding this. Since 1989, 7 hikers from Australia, Germany and England had gone missing. Searching through those missing persons, police confirmed that the 2 bodies that were found on this day belonged to Caroline Clark and Joanne Walters, who were the British backpackers who had gone missing in April 92, so 6 months earlier.
Okay.
At that time, there was a search of the area for other evidence or remains, but
Yes.
nothing was found at that point, and the investigation stalled at that point.
Okay.
13 months later, in October of 1993, a man discovered a human skull and a thigh bone in a different remote part of the same forest.
Yeah.
When police responded to that discovery, they found the remains of another body, and it was later discovered that this was the Australian couple, Deborah and James, and they had gone missing way back in 89.
Okay. Wow.
Some of their belongings were found 100 kilometres away in Sydney.
Wow.
Yes.
It's interesting that they linked the belongings to the couple.
Well, I don't know at what point, but yes. So it was very disparate from where they had been looking, I think.
Yeah.
Then a month after that discovery, a police sergeant discovered another human skull in a clearing of the same forest. Those remains were Simone Schmeidel, a German hitchhiker who'd gone missing in January 1991. And the belongings of another missing hiker were found at that scene, and it led to the discovery of 2 more bodies. So a couple of days later, they found the German couple, Anja and Gabor.
Okay. So what are we up to? Is that 7? That's 7.
That's 7.
All right. And so what are the police thinking? Where are they going with the investigation?
Initially, the pattern of these murders indicated to police that there was a single perpetrator who was targeting young backpackers.
Yep.
The New South Wales Police launched a massive investigation, which included interviewing people who'd been in that area. They were looking for patterns in the disappearances. And they, through their investigation, worked out that the method of selecting and killing the victims had a number of key steps that were common.
Okay.
And this came out in the prosecution case.
Yeah.
So they found it was young backpackers, primarily tourists, who were hitchhiking along major highways in New South Wales. They were typically travelling alone or in pairs. They were offered a ride. They were then driven to this remote area, far from witnesses or any help. And then once in the secluded location, they would be restrained, and they assumed it was through threats of violence or the use of a gun.
Yep.
And then they were killed in various different ways.
Yep.
So the manner in which they were all killed was, without doubt, brutal.
Yeah.
Each time, involved significant torture on occasion because of the decomposition of the bodies. The medical evidence doesn't disclose an actual cause of death for any of the victims.
Wow.
But many of them were found with multiple stab wounds. So Joanne Walters had been stabbed 14 times in the chest and the abdomen and 9 times in the back. Some of those wounds severed her spine.
Wow.
So a lot of force.
A lot of force.
Caroline Clark was shot 10 times in the head, indicating extreme violence and a suggestion that she had been used as some form of target practice. And some victims, like Deborah Everest, showed signs of blunt force trauma. Anja Habscheid was decapitated. In addition, the positioning of the bodies suggested they had been bound and possibly subjected to prolonged suffering before they were killed.
Yeah.
All but one of them did appear to have been sexually interfered with.
Wow.
Before or after their death.
The males as well.
Yes. So they were each found buried or partially buried in a shallow grave in the forest, often covered with leaves and branches to try and conceal the grave. Sometimes there were items arranged around the bodies, maybe as some form of signature or ritual on the part of the killer. Each of them were young. They were between 19 and 22 years old, and each was travelling far from home, the inference being that they possibly would not have been missed immediately because they were travelling. Each had set out along the Hume Highway from near Liverpool in order to hitchhike to the south.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking about some of those, things of selecting, in inverted commas, these. I mean, I don't know how many people are hitchhiking, but, I mean, usually it's young people.
Yes.
And backpackers. So,
yes, that's right.
I mean, it might be that they were just the people who were easy to pick up, as it were.
Well, I guess so. I mean, we talked about hitchhikers in our last episode.
Yeah.
And I would never hitchhike. I guess because I've read so many cases where it does not go well.
Yeah.
but I don't know if it still happens so much anymore.
Not really. I remember it a bit when we were young,
Yeah.
but I've never hitchhiked. But I've picked up a few hitchhikers now, but I'm not picking up any hitchhikers after.
You've picked up hitchhikers?
Yeah, before, absolutely.
Gosh, I would never do that either.
Yeah.
I often feel bad when I drive past people who need a lift. Like I feel for them, but I would never
pick up a hitchhiker.
No,
Well, I won't
about
anymore.
Mary. Remember that movie?
Yes.
Yeah. Classic hitchhiker scene. It wasn't until the end of February 94, so like a few months later after the 93 discoveries, that there was a breakthrough. And this came from a 20-year-old woman
that's right, I remember this,
who went to police and said that while backpacking in January 1990 in New South Wales, she was offered a lift, which she accepted. And while she was in the vehicle, she said to the police the driver had started to act strangely, and she got out of the vehicle and she ran herself into the Belanglo State Forest.
Wow.
As she ran, she believed that the driver was firing gunshots after her.
Wow.
But he missed. And so that gave a bit more information to the police.
Yeah.
Their investigation continued to develop, and they narrowed their list of suspects from 230 potential people down to 32. And there was a lot of publicity about the case. And it was international publicity, I guess, partly because the victims were international. But as a result of that, there was a fellow from Birmingham, Paul Onions, who heard about the backpacker murders on television.
Yeah.
And he recalled his own near miss with death that had occurred in January 1990, just outside of Sydney. Paul Onion's story was instrumental in bringing down Ivan Milat.
Yeah. It's amazing that these people didn't go to the police with the stories after it happened.
I think Paul Onion's, there was a report.
Wow.
So let me tell you.
Yeah.
So he was 24 years old and an English tourist on a working holiday in Australia. And on 25th of January 1990, he left Glebe in Sydney and walked for about an hour along the Hume Highway on his way to finding work as a fruit picker in Mildura.
Yeah.
I'm not very good with geography, but it's all south.
Okay.
He said that a man approached him and offered him a lift when he was at a place called Casula. I don't know where that is. And so he was taken to a four-wheel drive, hopped in. The man told him his name was Bill.
Yeah.
He said to Onions that he worked on the roads and he was on holidays and he was on his way to see his friends in Canberra. As they're chatting, he finds out that Onion, Paul, has no friends or family in Australia and that he was travelling around the country from the UK.
Yeah.
He told Onions in return that he, Bill, lived in the Liverpool area and his family was from Yugoslavia, and he said he was divorced. So a bit of information sharing.
Yes.
As they're travelling along the Hume Highway, things got a little bit nasty. The driver began to express quite controversial and aggressive opinions about certain things, and Onions became a bit nervous about the type of person he was with.
Yeah.
And when they reached a point which was about 900 metres north of the turnoff to the Belanglo State Forest, the driver stopped the vehicle. He gave an explanation to Onions, which Onions was not, convinced by. And at that point, Onions noticed some rope protruding from a bag under the driver's seat. And so he decided at that point, I'm done.
Yeah.
So he leapt out of the car and he started to run. So Bill, the driver, chased him.
Really?
Fired a shot after him. He caught him for a time, but Onions broke free and ran back out onto the road and stood in front of an ongoing vehicle, forcing it to stop. He jumped into the vehicle. This poor female driver was terrified of what was happening.
Yeah.
But she quickly made a U-turn, headed back north along the Hume Highway, and they drove straight to the Bowral police station and reported the incident.
Yeah.
Onion's backpack containing all of his belongings, was left in the car.
Yes. And that becomes crucial later, doesn't it? There's
So,
a little Easter egg. Yes.
A little Easter egg.
Yeah.
So the description that he provided to police on that day was recorded, and was as follows. A man called Bill, 6 feet tall, slight build, dark complexion, black hair, a moustache like Merv Hughes.
Oh, Australian cricketer, fast bowler.
Yes.
Very obvious moustache.
Yes. Anyone who watched cricket in the 80s
will remember him.
would know Merv.
Yes.
And black sunglasses. He put in the fact that the family was from Yugoslavia and that he was divorced. He thought he was in about his mid-30s.
Yeah.
He described the vehicle as a white or silver four-wheel drive, possibly a Nissan or a Toyota.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that he was carrying a 4-inch barrel revolver, which was loaded.
Wow.
Yes.
Well, he knew it was loaded because the guy had fired it at him. Okay.
He also said he'd been told he worked for the Road and Traffic Authority, the RTA, in Liverpool.
Okay.
Now, Milat, as it turns out, was not 6 feet tall.
Mm-hmm.
He was about 5 feet 8 inches, but Onions himself was only 5'6".
Right.
And in the circumstances, possibly, that's a matter of inches. I don't know how precise you can be.
Yeah.
Down the track, police discovered that in 1990, Milat was often known or referred to as Bill.
Oh, okay.
So that lined up. His father came
Can't
from
believe he gave his real name or his real nickname.
No. His father came from Yugoslavia.
Okay, surname's a bit of a giveaway.
He owned and regularly drove a Nissan Patrol four-wheel drive.
Yes, I was going to say, was it a Nissan Patrol?
Yep.
Yes, okay, because they look similar to the Toyota Land Cruisers.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he had been employed by the RTA at one point.
Yeah.
He was divorced. He had a moustache like Merv
Hughes.
Hughes.
So a lot of what he said is actually true.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. I suppose if you assume you're going to kill the person, then you don't mind telling them the truth.
That's right. And I mean, this didn't lead them on this day to Ivan Milat. This is down
years
the track
later when
matching up that description with Ivan Milat when he was discovered.
Yes.
So there were some things that didn't fit in terms of the physical description, but it was strong evidence down the track against him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the height, maybe or maybe not, but the Merv Hughes moustache, that's not something you're going to miss or mistake.
Although I do wonder, back then, late 80s, early 90s,
how many people had
many people had that Merv Hughes moustache?
Yeah, I must have my recollection, when you say Ivan Milat, is immediately of that moustache.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't think it was that common. I mean, you do have a fair bit of facial hair to pull off a moustache like that.
If you Google Ivan Milat, I mean, I look at him now and just feel sick knowing everything that he did. But he actually wasn't, it's not like he was probably quite a attractive looking guy for that time.
What were you expecting, that he would look, have sort of like
a
Phantom of the Opera, hunchback?
Yeah.
Horribly scarred face.
I think that would be good if offenders could have some kind of physical demarcations like that so people were wary.
Yes, yes, that's right. But obviously then we wouldn't have stories like the Hunchback of Notre Dame where he's actually a very lovely person.
True. And do you know what? Totally off the topic, but I was just listening. So Ted Bundy, who was meant to have been some Casanova and so good looking.
American serial killer.
There he is. People, yes, American serial killer. So Zac Efron played him.
Oh.
And was criticised because he was so good looking and portrayed Ted Bundy as like a kind of sexy serial killer. That the true nature of Ted Bundy was kind of lost in that portrayal.
Really?
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I thought the story was that Ted Bundy was actually good looking and suave and
became the focus. Anyway, side issue.
Yes.
All right. So how did it all
start to unravel?
Crashing down?
Yes.
So obviously the police were aware that they had a serial killer at large. There was so many victims.
Yes. Although killed in different ways. So
different ways, but in the same area and same sort of demographic.
Yes.
So they published photos of the victims, and that brought in calls from locals who'd seen them hiking through the countryside or thumbing rides. No one said they'd seen who the killer was.
No.
But the tragic story of Joanne and Caroline, our British victims, and their parents' very brave yet futile attempt to find them, came to sort of represent the true horror of this case. So those girls' names had first come to the public attention when police took a really highly unusual step of interrupting a public broadcast of an English Australia rugby match.
Wow.
In June 92. And it was an appeal for help to locate the girls because they hadn't been found at this point. So this is the missing person investigation. Officers in the Missing Persons Bureau wanted the largest possible TV audience, hoping that the girls or someone who knew them might have been watching the match, being able to provide some information. So they set up a toll-free hotline in a bid to get new information, but nothing came of that. So they had met, the two girls had met in Australia. They were from different parts of the UK, travelling together. They shared a rented flat in Sydney's King's Cross and then decided to hitchhike south to pick fruit. Similar story. So it was Easter Saturday, 18th of April. They were last seen heading towards King's Cross Station, carrying their sleeping bags and a tent. So it was 2 weeks later the parents began to get worried. They hadn't heard from the girls. Then Joanne's visa expired in May. They still didn't hear anything from the girls. So they reported her disappearance, in Wales, who then told Australian police. And both families came to Australia to search for their daughters. Just didn't want to accept the possibility that there might have been foul play. They even preferred the idea that perhaps they were staying with Aborigines.
Interesting.
On a remote desert station or stranded somewhere in the vast outback as a preferred outcome to.
Well, that is a preferred outcome.
Of course.
To being murdered, but
very specific.
And quite odd.
Very odd. But obviously they're not from Australia.
No.
So. By the time the girls' bodies were found, 5 other backpackers had vanished. The parents of Joanne faced the press to deliver a statement, and they said, whoever did this thing, I wouldn't call them sick because sick people can be cured to an extent. These are evil-minded people, and like dogs with rabies, there is only one way. They have got to be put down and destroyed.
Wow. But we don't have the death penalty.
No, we don't.
It was never going to happen.
I don't even think the UK did at that point.
No, I think
Anyway, it was very, I can't imagine your child going to have this holiday of a lifetime.
I know.
And never coming back. It's
it'd
just
be so horrible for the parents.
So time passed. There wasn't a specialist task force set up to investigate. It was just 3 detectives who were on the hunt, but in 12 months they turned up next to nothing. Meanwhile, ticking away, Publicity and Paul Onions enters the picture. So, also in November 93, the New South Wales government offered a reward of $500,000 for information.
For which particular? All 7 or just?
Well, for information leading to the killer's conviction. So the largest bounty ever offered in the country, and a free pardon was also offered to any accomplice not involved in the murders who would give the killer up.
Wow.
So they really did want to find the perpetrator.
Onion
came back to Australia and reminded police that he'd made this complaint on this day, and that started a fresh line of investigation. And the reward received 1 million tip-offs.
Wow.
And they followed up 10,000 of those leads.
Wow.
Yes. So it was really a lot of information coming in. So they used a computer system called NetMap to chart any connections between the names of the victims, their addresses, gun ownership, vehicles, times, all of that sort of thing.
Interesting. So there's the mid-90s they're doing this, or late 90s?
Early 90s.
Wow, and they're using computers, okay.
The clues were there, but they just couldn't put it all together. They used satellite photographs to see how wet conditions had been. Now, all of this stuff, every stone was being unturned. And the Milat name started to crop up in the investigations.
Okay.
So police discovered a statement in their files from Ivan's brother Alex, who had contacted detectives in October 93 with quite a strange story. 18 months earlier, he claimed he had seen 2 women tied up in the back of 2 cars with a group of men near the Belanglo State Forest.
Right.
But the details and the dates didn't match. The man Alex said he was with failed to corroborate the story. They discounted his statement at the time, but it was still on record.
Yes.
So then this,
this surname, this Eastern European surname.
They also found a report from the wife of a worker at a building materials plant detailing her suspicions about one of her husband's workmates. That tip-off was made early in October and referred to a worker called Paul Miller. And police knew that Paul Miller was, in fact, Richard Milat, Ivan's younger brother.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
What does it say why the wife thought that this guy was involved?
I couldn't find the detail.
He must have been acting pretty odd.
Yeah. So by the end of that year, police were making discreet inquiries about Ivan Milat at the RTA in Sydney. They found out the dates he'd had holidays and days off. They approached his brother at his home on the premise of checking his gun licenses. But Ivan got wind of the investigation and he began to stash his firearms in a secret alcove in Walter's home so that they couldn't be found.
Right.
Then following up on the thought that they were all hitchhiking, he checked, Senior Constable Paul Gordon checked records for attacks on travellers who had left the Liverpool area, and he came across an acquittal in 1971 for Ivan Milat for the rape of 2 hitchhikers.
Jeepers.
So the noose is beginning to tighten. So I'll just quickly tell you about those rapes.
And so Ivan Milat does live in the area. He lives in Liverpool, does he?
Yeah, he lives there.
Wow.
So at that time, 1971, Milat was 26. He was out driving his Falcon V8.
Wow.
And he was looking for hitchhikers. So in Liverpool, he picked up 2 18-year-old girls who wanted a lift to Melbourne. They were undergoing psychiatric treatment and were both on Valium at the time.
Jeepers.
So they dozed off and they awoke on a dirt road, and Milat produced a knife and told them he was going to have sex with both of them.
Wow.
He brazenly promised, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to kill you. You won't scream when I cut your throats, will you? He then bound their hands and feet with nylon cord. He raped one girl in the front seat. Later, they both escaped when he pulled into a gas station to buy them a soft drink.
Wow.
So he was caught.
They were very lucky by the sounds of it.
So lucky. And he was caught on the road after a police chase. He always claimed that both of the women consented to
being tied up.
Well, to the sex.
Oh, is that how he escaped? Okay.
And in 1974, after quite a poor performance on the witness stand by the victim, a jury believed him that they were consenting, and he was set free, and he didn't appear again in court until 1994 when he was charged with these murders.
Jeepers.
So, a seasoned detective who put Milat through intense interrogation said, Ivan is the coolest man I have ever interviewed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some of this stuff is very good for in terms of an investigation. So finding out that in 1971 or whatever he's been acquitted of a rape of hitchhikers, that's useful investigative, information. Not relevant in court. It'd be hard to get that in court.
No, that's right. But so they're still trying to.
Yeah, but what are they piecing together to get in court if he's not admitting it in an interview? Where is their evidence coming from that they're going to put before a jury?
For the murders. Yeah, no, they didn't have it yet.
Yeah. So they know who it is, but they don't have
That's right.
Yeah.
At the time he was arrested for those first rapes, they did check all unresolved rapes to see if he was involved. And there was one case in 1984 where 2 girls were hitchhiking down the Hume Highway. They were picked up and taken to the Belangolo forest.
Wow.
And a man they later identified as Milat demanded, okay, girls, which one of you wants to go first?
Yeah.
But they managed to escape. They hid in the forest while he was prowling around trying to find them.
Wow.
Yeah. So the noose is tightening. They had that information about the earlier charges. They had onion. There was some evidence that he was in the area when Simone Schmeidel went missing. His vehicle was caught on a red light camera. They found some rope which had bloodstains on it in his garage. And so they found a shirt which belonged to Onions when they searched his residence.
So this is pre-DNA. So, I mean, obviously they could test and determine it's blood.
Yes.
And they determine it's her shirt, because of the description?
Yes.
Okay.
That's right. And there's evidence about 1 week after the disappearance of the German couple that he asked his neighbour to repair a hole in the door of his Nissan vehicle that he said was caused by a bullet.
Wow.
So all of these little, well, not so little, but a number of different things all coming together.
Yeah.
And so he was then arrested in 1994.
Circumstantial evidence.
Circumstantial case. There was 14 different things that were listed as being part of the circumstantial case. I'm not going to go into it in detail.
No.
There was a lot of property, weapons.
Yeah, when you say property, whose property? The backpackers.
Yeah, the backpackers'
and
property.
it's found at his house.
And his brother's house.
And his brother's house. So
I think there is some suggestion maybe the brother was involved, but
yes.
nothing ever came of that.
No.
So they had that evidence and they arrested him and they charged him and he went to trial. We'll come to the trial.
Yeah.
All right. So I do have information about him, but he was from a big family, 6 brothers, 7 sisters.
Jeepers, that is big.
It was a very reportedly strict and rough household that he grew up in. His dad was very hardworking, but also very authoritarian and demanded discipline from his children.
Yeah.
The mother was born in Australia, raised the family. She was devoted to her children.
Oh, wow.
Just could not accept that they were not
Yeah.
good. She remained supportive of Ivan throughout his trial and his imprisonment.
Yeah.
So that whole family lived in a 3-bedroom house on the outskirts of Sydney.
Wow.
The children slept in triple-tiered bunks. Another son, Alex, remembers that having guns in the house was like having a spare pair of boots. All 14 children learned how to shoot.
Jeepers.
So
okay. This is back in the 50s and 60s.
He was born in 44.
Yeah.
So at 17, he started his criminal career. He was involved in a break-in and a theft. He accrued a criminal record for theft, burglary, and armed robbery. He then had that acquittal for the rapes.
Yeah.
But he hadn't been to prison for any length of time.
And he doesn't come to the notice of the police after that till
this.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we'll talk about the trial a little bit.
Yeah. Are you going to talk about the specific pieces of property that I found?
Well, do you want me to?
I do.
Okay.
Well, because you mentioned the backpack of
right.
Paul Onions.
Okay, so
I mean, that sounds like a lay-down misère, doesn't it? You get a search warrant, you walk in, you find a backpack, it's got a little label on it, Paul Onion. He's already come forward and said.
All right. So I didn't know how much detail you want. Okay, so this is the circumstantial case.
Yes.
He was in possession of a substantial amount of the deceased backpacker's property at the house he was arrested.
Sorry, all 7 of them?
Well, a number of them.
Yeah.
Plus in his mother's house where he was living at the time of the murders. So it was spread amongst the residences he had been residing in.
Yes.
He owned the Ruger 1022 weapon, which was proved to have shot Caroline Clark and Gabor Neugebauer.
Wow, I wonder how they did that. Ballistics evidence. Interesting.
I guess so.
Okay.
The accused was in the area at the same time that Gabor Neugebauer was shot there because his rifle was tracked to that crime and he also had that rifle. I'm not quite sure how that works.
Yeah.
Area A.
I would love to see the ballistics evidence.
Ammunition located with his property in the alcove in his brother's house that was the same batch number as that used in the offending.
So they must have recovered some bullets from the areas
yes, I
where
think
the bodies
they called
were.
it Area A.
Yes.
They found Winchester Winner ammunition with a particular stamp in his bedroom and in the spare room at the house where he was arrested. And that was consistent with cartridge cases located in the offence area.
Okay.
There were bullets recovered from and under the head of Caroline Clark that had a gouge mark, most likely from a silencer. He had a handmade silencer in his garage when he was arrested.
Wow.
He left his Nissan with his neighbour to repair the damage caused by a bullet.
Hole, yeah.
He was in possession of the rope. There was a leash device at one of the scenes, and all of the ingredients for that, I don't even know what a leash device is, were at his home when he was arrested.
Okay, interesting. I'm not sure that.
I don't know.
It doesn't sound particularly strong evidence. So I suppose you'd have to see what it is.
Industrial recycled rags used at the killings of 4 of them were found at the scene and in
his possession.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that. I mean, they sell those rags. You know, you can buy them from Bunnings. I mean, not that Bunnings
Such
existed
a
back
defense
then,
lawyer.
but yeah.
He carried a Bowie knife in his car, which could have been used to stab the victims?
Sure.
Again,
not
the pattern of
particularly
all
strong.
7 murders was the same, and the attack on Paul Onions was a huge piece of circumstantial evidence.
Well, because Paul Onions identifies him, does he, from a photo? And I thought you said Paul Onions' backpack is located.
Well, I think that was part of the property, that first lot of circumstantial evidence. There was definitely a shirt of his that was located, I'm pretty sure.
I mean, so what does Ivan Milat say? They go like, why have you got this backpack? And he says, I don't know, just found it.
I think he tried to blame his brother.
His brother?
Let me just tell you. So the arrest, so they did challenge Onion's identification evidence of Milat.
The defence lawyers for Milat, yep.
He was shown a photo board which contained 13 photos, which included a photo of Milat.
And only one of them had a moustache like Merv Hughes.
Well, I don't know if that's not why. It was, so he made the photo ID in 94. He'd been attacked in 1990.
Yeah.
He said, that's him, number 4. He is identical to the face I see that approached me at the news agency. He has got the same moustache and face. That's him.
That's a pretty strong identification.
Very strong identification. And so they challenged it on the basis it had been 4 years, that Onions was terrified at the time of the attack, that there were some little discrepancies between his original description and Milat himself. And they said that although 3 of the photos were of men with that same handlebar moustache, there were no suitable alternatives on the photo board.
Yeah. So the rules are they've got to get people who look similar to the...
Yes, and they said it wasn't... They could have used a photo of Milat's brother Richard, which they had in their possession because they had photos of him, and they chose not to, and he looked very similar.
See, and the other thing about photo board is they tend to use photographs of people who've been in custody.
They used Milat's passport photo.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, so it was challenged, but it was allowed.
Yeah, because I think after 4 years, I mean, you say, oh, your memory's not very good, but he's choosing from how many faces,
13.
13 faces, and he picks out one, it could be number 5 and could be number 7. It's like, no, it's definitely number 4.
But you've done quite a bit of work on photo boards, haven't you?
Photo board. Yeah, mine was more on reconstructing faces.
Oh, okay.
Which is particularly
So do you
unreliable.
think a photo board ID is reliable?
Oh, they're open to challenge, and I've challenged them before. But I would have challenged it if I was representing Milat, absolutely. But it does sound to me like it's a pretty strong ID.
Okay. All right. So the trial began in March 96. It lasted for I couldn't be sure, but some say 15, some say 17 weeks.
Wow.
Yes. So Paul Onion's account was pivotal. There was the forensic evidence found at his property which linked him to the murders. There was behavioural evidence put forward testimony regarding his violent tendencies and his knowledge of the Belangolo State Forest.
I must say I probably object to that, but yep.
So Milat's defence claimed that the evidence was circumstantial and that he was being framed by other family members.
Interesting.
Yes.
So circumstantial evidence is evidence that doesn't directly implicate him, but there's no explanation for the circumstantial evidence except for no rational explanation except for he's the murderer.
I've written this down. So in his closing address, defence counsel said, whichever way you look at it, it is absolutely irrefutable that whoever has committed these 8 offences must be either within the Milat family or so very closely associated with it, it does not much matter. The question is, who is it within the Milat family? Who has committed these 8 offences? Because it was the 7 murders and the attack on Onions.
Got it.
The question is, do you have a reasonable doubt that it was Ivan Milat as opposed to someone else in the family?
Yes. Well, I mean, you can see why they're saying. So if stuff is found at Ivan Milat's place, Ivan Milat's mother's place, and Ivan Milat's brother's place, well, presumably all the family members have access to those and can leave stuff.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know how many of them had handlebar moustaches or Merv Hughes moustaches, but that sounds like a perfectly reasonable defence because they just have to have a reasonable doubt about Ivan, and they've got to then acquit.
Well, he gave evidence.
Ivan gives evidence. Oh,
and he was subjected to a very damaging cross-examination.
Wow, okay.
Is the report.
Yeah.
And the judge referred to things he'd said referred to that statement of defence that it had to be someone in the family as an important concession, like that
Sure.
it was some kind of admission there.
Well, I mean, in some senses it is, but I mean, you can only play the cards that are in your hand.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the grounds of appeal that he raised.
Oh, the judge shouldn't have said that.
Mm-hmm.
I know, sounds pretty reasonable.
On the 64th day of the trial, as the judge was about to start the second day of the summing up, a juror revealed in chambers to the judge and to both counsel that he'd received a phone call the night before from a man, and it was of a threatening nature.
Wow.
But the juror was very happy to continue on with the trial. He told the judge he had no concerns. But he was discharged.
Wow.
He said he hadn't mentioned the phone call to any other juror. So defence at that point requested the entire jury be discharged, but the judge declined.
Yeah, on the basis that he might have said something to them. Yes.
And that became another ground of appeal, which also failed.
Yeah.
It is, pretty big example of that huge faith we have in our jurors.
Oh, absolutely.
I think.
But sorry, remind me, you said it's about the appeal actually is now about authority for the proposition of representation. So what did he argue about his representation?
He said that he didn't have equal representation.
That's right.
So on the prosecution side was, I think, a silk and a junior silk. Maybe, or someone.
And then another junior barrister. So 3 barristers, and he only had 2.
Had 2.
Yes.
And so the principle that comes from it is that you are not entitled to equal representation. The threshold is, are you competently represented?
Yes.
And so even if you had a new criminal lawyer doing their first case, if that person was deemed to be competent, then you have been sufficiently represented.
Yes. Yes.
Which I think is fair.
It is fair, yes. But I mean, that places a huge responsibility on law schools to make sure that, and, things to educate lawyers, make sure they're getting lawyers right, because it is assumed once they're in court that they're competent unless that's determined.
Right. That's why they should come and be taught criminal law by me.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So 17 weeks later, when the judge came to the summing up, he said that in 17 years as a judge, he had never known a case when the prosecution and defence cases had varied so much.
I'm not sure that's an appropriate comment.
Indeed, you may have wondered at times whether the barristers were each talking about the same case, he commented.
Again, I wouldn't have. That would have been my grounds of appeal right there.
So it was the 13th week of the trial that Milat gave evidence. He could have made an unsworn statement from the dock, which I don't.
Oh, okay, so they got rid of this, but you used to be able to stand up. It's an ancient. So they never used to let the defendant give a sworn statement because they didn't want them to lie on oath and then have their soul put in jeopardy for lying on oath.
Right.
So they used to allow them to make a statement which was unsworn, and they couldn't be questioned on it. So they would just stand up in the dock and then say their story and then sit down. And they got rid of it in Australia after Lionel Murphy, the High Court judge, who was charged with an offence while sitting as a High Court judge. He was prosecuted, and the first prosecution succeeded, and he was sentenced. He appealed successfully. They gave him a second trial, and in the second trial, he failed on the first one. Well, he'd given evidence on the first one and been cross-examined and done very badly. A judge had done very badly in cross-examination.
Wow.
He was cross-examined by Ian Callanan, who later himself became a High Court judge.
Yeah.
Anyway, so on his second trial, Ian Callanan is again prosecuting, and Lionel Murphy decides he's not going to give evidence, and he makes a statement from the dock where he can't be cross-examined, and he's acquitted.
Wow.
Yeah.
I have never heard of that
I know,
practice.
it's amazing, isn't it? And then after that, they got rid of the rule, which had been around for hundreds of years, that you could make an unsworn.
So that wouldn't have been when you were in practice.
Oh, no.
And
long time
obviously not when I was.
Well,
but anyway,
it sounds like it was about the mid-90s.
He had the choice to do that, but he didn't.
Yeah. Actually, sorry, Lionel Murphy was prosecuted in the early 80s, so it was a while before they got rid of it, but it was certainly, I remember complaints about Lionel Murphy doing that. Yeah.
He admitted to having the ammunition at his house. He had never been to the Belangolo State Forest, he said, and he had no explanation as to how any of the victims' property came to be at his or his brother's homes.
Okay.
So he couldn't really help them.
A bare denial, we'd call that, not particularly helpful.
All right. So he was convicted and he was sentenced in July The judge said the case against him was an overwhelming one, although his legal representatives displayed a tactical ability of a high order and conducted his defence in a skillful and responsible manner. In my view, the jury's verdicts were, in the end, inevitable. I agree entirely with those verdicts. Any other, in my view, would have flown in the face of reality.
Interesting.
Very strong.
Very strong.
He described the murders as savage and cruel,
yes,
committed with force which was unusual and vastly more than was necessary to cause death, committed for some form of psychological gratification.
Wow. And I'm assuming took all that into account on sentence.
Yep, 7 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole.
Never to be released.
Never to be released.
Yes.
He also got 18 years for his attack on Paul Onions.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So he appealed 10 days after he was sentenced, but the judgment of the New South Wales Court of Criminal Appeal denied the appeal, took to task the evidence of Paul Onions, media publicity hindering his right to a fair trial. There were 6 grounds overall, and the court was satisfied there was no miscarriage of justice.
Yeah.
He had received a fair trial.
Yeah. I wonder if they had a ground of appeal of trying Paul Onions' trial at the same time as the other murder trials.
Well, I don't know. Is it similar fact evidence? Is it that rule?
It was that rule that we talked about in our similar fact evidence.
Yeah.
Anyway, I assume they had that argument.
All right. So I'll tell you about what happened to Milat. So he remained imprisoned at Goulburn Correctional Centre, high security facility, never confessed to the murders, remained defiant, maintained his innocence throughout his imprisonment. He was known for several hunger strikes and self-harm incidents in an attempt to manipulate prison authorities.
Okay.
After 23 years in prison, in 2019, he died of esophageal and stomach cancer at age 74.
My recollection was he had that for a few years and he tried to get out on humanitarian grounds because he was ill with cancer and they didn't let him out.
In 2016, Milat's nephew published a number of letters that had been written by Milat. They'd been writing to each other for 14 years. In the letters, which were published as a book, I think in 2003, he whinged about his cell being an enclosed cement box and explained that he had hacked off his own finger and tried to send it to a judge in 2009 as a way of saying how effed the court system was. That was not the first time he'd tried to injure himself while in prison. He swallowed razor blades, staples, other metal objects. There was actually a court hearing about not releasing information regarding those incidents as a matter of a breach of privacy, and that failed. So you can see that as well.
Yeah.
He was maybe looking for compensation, so he requested to be moved to a hospital or lower security prison, and if that had been successful, he could have gotten like $40,000 compensation for the suffering.
Wow.
Milat convinced his nephew he was innocent of the murders.
Yes.
Authorities in New South Wales believe they have only scratched the surface of his homicidal rampage. In 1998, detectives announced a new investigation into his movements dating back to the late 70s.
Wow.
According to some media reports, he is suspected in the disappearances of 6 Newcastle women and an equal number of tourists, including visitors from Europe and Japan. One rare survivor, a 41-year-old Newcastle resident, has told police she was abducted and raped by him in 1978.
Wow.
A second rape victim the following year has also been re-interviewed in an effort to link him to the crime.
Yeah.
But as I said, nothing's come of it.
Well, he's passed away now, so it's all a bit redundant.
On his deathbed, he showed no remorse, and although people had hoped for a deathbed confession, he said, "You could put a blowtorch to my ears or eyes or whatever, and I still can't help you." When interviews with his victims' families were played for him, he said, "What do you want me to watch this for? I don't feel sorry for them. Why should I feel sorry for them?" And when they talked about the murders and compared them to the deaths of his mother and sisters, trying to say, do you feel compassion? He goes, happens all the time.
Wow. Okay. Not sure that's accurate.
No. So there you go. So,
and then obviously it's picked up and made Wolf Creek, which I can't remember when that comes out, early 2000s. I haven't watched it either. It looks too scary for me. I'm not up for that kind of stuff.
Also based maybe a little bit on, the Peter and the woman from Oh, no, that was a different
Peter
movie.
Falconio?
Yes.
Oh.
Was it partly to do with that as well?
I suppose it might. I mean, that was
know.
about backpackers and murders on highways.
All right. Have we got any implications? Yes, we had the formation of task forces as a result of this case.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So that was the precedent for the formation of specialised task forces for large-scale investigations.
Yeah.
Highlighted the need for careful jury selection processes with pretrial publicity, obviously not the only case where that became important.
An issue.
Review of parole laws as a result. So the severity of his crimes and his lack of remorse contributed to discussions and reviews of parole laws and the conditions under which life sentences should be applied.
Yeah, so he's sentenced when in the late 90s to life means life.
Mid to late, yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty popular in New South Wales around that time. I know a few people who went to jail. Life means life. Right. One of them was just a drug trafficker. I think that's a bit rough.
But you know the courts are so tough on drug offending. Like I
know, but never to be released.
No, I know, but I still think, like we were talking about sentencing in class last week and I told them to find a media report and a lot of them were like personal violence, you know, a GBH or a rape or whatever, and sentences of like 4 to 6 years.
Yeah.
A guy with heroin, 13 years. You know, like it's not what you would expect.
No, that's right.
You know?
Yeah.
He still gets cited in, you know, proposed reforms, particularly when it comes to, the Bowerville murder and double jeopardy. They talked about the need for unsolved serial murders to be dealt with in whatever means possible, and cite Milat as, you know, this.
Whatever means possible sounds a bit broad.
Well, sorry, I might be.
No, sure,
there,
but reopen cases
and so separate trials and that sort of thing. So,
interesting.
So, I mean, look, probably not the cheeriest case to share, but you know, amazing police work. Paul Onions did an amazing job coming all the way back and
absolutely
escaping in the first place.
Well, I mean, I don't know, but I wonder if he felt a bit annoyed that he'd made the complaint to police in a timely way and nothing had ever come of it.
But how would they have tracked down? You know, he didn't even know for sure what the car was.
But it seems like they didn't make the connection. He had to come back and go,
no, he had to come back for that.
You know.
And in fact, I read a book about Ivan Milat, which was an amazing book. I don't have a copy of it to show our listeners.
Sure.
But I do worry about the rest of that Milat family.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was more going on there, I swear it.
Well, didn't one of his nephews go to jail for some brutal murder?
Oh, did he?
I think so.
I don't know. I didn't look into that.
Anyway.
But that is the story of Ivan Milat.
Wow, okay.
So if any of my students are listening when I talk about it in class, now you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, you'll be expected to know.
Yes.
Thank you for that, Lizzie. That was fantastic.
That's all right.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to the episode. If you enjoyed it, please rate and review or like and subscribe. It all helps Lizzie and I keep this podcast going. If you're interested in clips, you can look at them on Instagram and TikTok. Just search for Justice Matters Pod. See you next episode.